I put him on. I put him in the baby carrier, which I hadn't used very much. And I just went down. I took out the recycling. And I threw that away, and I went down to the grocery store and I bought a couple of things and came back. And I had this realization, like, oh, you know what? I can leave the house with my child who's quite young, and actually we're going to be fine.
Mm.
And maybe tomorrow we'll take the bus somewhere. And it just kind of like opened up a whole world of like I can sort of parent equally.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Dad Dialogue podcast. I am your host, Laurence. A quick reminder, as always, if you want to join the podcast yourself, go over to daddialogue.co.uk. You can click on contact. There's a sign up form there. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, you can give us a follow over on Instagram, YouTube, all the rest of the sort of social media places. So let me introduce today's guest. Today's guest is Joe. Joe is originally from America, and he and his wife have lived in the Netherlands for about 8 years. He has had two boys here, two sons. They are now nearly 5 years old and 2.5. So in our conversation, we talk a little bit about moving internationally and then having children in a foreign country where maybe you're not as familiar with the system. Joe also shares about his journey of wanting more as a dad, realizing one day that he just wanted to be able to do more for his family, and I think I'm really thankful for him to sharing the journey that he went through and what he set up following that. He created a dad group, which just seemed to go bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So if there's something that you're interested in learning more about, learning some tips and tricks, definitely stay tuned to hear that later on in the episode. Thanks for joining us today. Let's get into the conversation. So can you just start off by telling us a little about you and your family, how many kids you have, their ages and so on?
Sure. Yeah, so my wife and I, we have two boys, ages, well, my oldest is almost 5 now. It's crazy to think about. So yeah, I think 3 weeks he turns 5.
Wow.
That's Julian, and I also have a 2.5-year-old boy. His name is Eve, and he's like the little mini version of his brother, just following him around doing everything that he wants to do.
Okay.
But yeah, we're my wife and I are both from the U.S. We grew up on different sides of the country, and we met at school, got married, moved to the Netherlands about 8 years ago.
Mm.
And yeah, that's a whole story on its own, I guess. But that's kind of who we are.
Well, we can go into that. So 8 years here in the Netherlands. What brought you guys here in the first place?
Yeah, so we were both working and living at the time in Washington D.C. After we were married, and my wife she's an art historian, so she was working in different museums there in the city, and she found pretty after a few years that she really needed a master's degree to do the next kind of job, the next level. So she was looking around the West Coast, East Coast in the US, and I don't remember exactly how, but she landed on Dutch still life painting as the thing that she wanted to study.
Okay.
So then she also looked at schools here. She looked in the
Mm.
UK, but also like Leiden, Utrecht. And yeah, she got accepted to a 2-year master's program at Utrecht University. And yeah, so we knew we would come for 2 years. And I'm a software designer, UX designer, so it was quite flexible for me.
Mm.
So when she got the letter, she asked me. I was like, okay, sure, let's do it. Like, why not?
Yep.
We'll figure it out. And we never came back. eight
Yeah.
years here. It's been great, and we lived in Utrecht for a few years, and then we moved to The Hague. And right before, or maybe a year before our first was born.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, feeling quite settled here, which is nice.
So what do you think kept you here?
That's a good question. I think part of it is the lifestyle. Like the quality of life is really really nice. Like I did like the grind in the US. I worked
Mm.
for design agencies, and it's like a project every few weeks or a couple months, working 60, 70, 80 hours.
Wow.
And it's a great way to start your career and a great way to like get a foothold in the
Mm.
industry. But yeah, I mean, the US is super competitive, so every aspect of life is competitive. And coming here, it's just so much more relaxed.
Mm.
Work-life balance is like a concept here
Mm.
that actually exists in some ways.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, just being more connected to the community, being like, we don't have a car. I drove like 2 hours a day every day since I
Mm.
was 16 years old. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in like really a small town in the US in the middle in Oklahoma. So when I look at the destinations I can get to in an hour and a half from where I live now versus that,
Yeah.
it's night and day. But no, I mean, we like the culture. We made some good friends, and yeah, there's just so much to like, especially with little kids here.
Mm.
I think if maybe we didn't have kids at this point, then we would have some different things that we were trying to do. Yeah, when we knew we wanted to have a baby, it was really easy to decide to stay, even though we didn't have that support network or even that many friends or no
Mm.
family to depend on. It was still a pretty easy decision to do that here.
So that factored into the decision for staying here because you knew you wanted to grow a family. So that was part of the decision process as well.
Yeah, it sort of happened at the same time where my wife, like, she would finish her program. She was working part time at the Art History Archive here in The Hague, and I just gotten a permanent contract at my job. And yeah, we wanted to have a baby, and we knew kind of like she has 5 siblings. I have 4 siblings. Most of them have kids. Like we kind of knew a little bit what it's like in the U.S.
Mm.
without having gone through it ourselves, and what we knew about the system here in the Netherlands, and like the flexibility and the afterbirth care and the cost or lack of cost,
Mm.
let's say, it was a pretty easy decision to do that here. I mean, it's a bit daunting, just like it's a new chapter of your life. You
Mm.
don't know what's going to happen. But we had a couple good friends who also lived like one door, two doors down.
That's
Um,
cool.
so we had some support, but yeah, looking back, it feels, well, maybe that was a bigger decision than we thought it was. But at the time, it really felt like natural
Yeah.
in that way.
No, I think that's often the case when you're in those situations. It's tough to kind of see so many steps ahead. You're just looking one step ahead, aren't you really?
Yeah.
So one of my questions was going to be about the experience of having your children here as a foreigner, someone that maybe isn't familiar with the system. How did you find that?
Yeah, I mean, it was tough to figure out what you needed. So, like, you have to choose a verloskundige, so you have to choose a midwife,
Mm.
and so then you just go online, and I didn't. I mean, we spoke a little bit of Dutch, could read a bit of Dutch, but then you kind of gravitate towards the agencies or the websites that are in English, or mention something for an English speaking
Mm.
audience. I mean, everyone here speaks English really well. I mean, especially in
Yeah.
the big cities, it's not a problem, even in the hospital, et cetera. So we weren't concerned on that level, but it was more like, yeah, how do we make a decision on these things without really knowing too much? Because we were also the first in our friend group to have a baby. So I think it was quite hard to just. It felt really arbitrary to just decide. Okay, this will be our verloskundige.
Mm.
This will be the maternity nurse. And we did it differently for our second, so we kind of learned some things along the way, and how that works, so sort of
Yeah.
trial and error. And we live quite close to one of the hospitals, so that was sort of easy. It's like, okay, well, worst case, I mean, it's like a kilometer away, 2 kilometers
Mm.
maybe. So yeah, I mean, we did all the things we could. So like we did tours at the hospital, which were, of course, that was in Dutch, but you kind of get a sense for what was being offered or how the
Mm.
process went. There were like information meetings at the midwife besides like the weekly checkups. So we tried to kind of expose ourselves to
Mm.
everything. And actually, the biggest thing that helped us was we did a hypnobirthing class, and that was also in Dutch, as we didn't understand all of it, but we got a good sense for how it went. But I think that sort of method is really helpful, especially for relaxation and all this kind of stuff. But the class itself was super detailed in terms of the process of birth and
Mm.
like what to expect and like what what questions you will face and like what processes, and it covered lots of things that I didn't expect it to,
Mm.
in that sense. So that really helped a lot, and that, I mean, I think that could have applied outside of the Netherlands as well as inside, right?
Mm.
And we took another course also, which was more about like movement and pregnancy, but it also covered some things that you can do as partners together.
That's cool.
So yeah, we just tried to just soak it all up, just try
Mm.
everything.
That's commendable that you guys went that far into like courses that you weren't even familiar in the language in. I think that's a pretty big, big decision to kind of put yourself in that kind of uncomfortable situation just in the hopes of learning something. So I think that's very commendable. Did you feel prepared as a dad with the arrival of your firstborn?
Mm, yes and no. I think, for being as, I don't know if not naive is not really the right word, but like for being as sort of green as we were, I think we were actually pretty well prepared.
Mm,
And looking back on this, I mean, of course, you don't know what you don't know, right? Until you're there.
mm,
But for the birth, I think I was pretty well prepared. I didn't know everything that I needed to, but we had a birth plan.
mm,
We had like relaxation techniques that I could help her with. We had sort of divided roles or scope. So I would handle the doctors, she would focus on the process, and that played out that way. So in that
mm,
sense, I think we were quite prepared. I would say where I was completely, utterly underprepared or just not ready was postpartum.
mm,
I think that's a completely different area, and I think in general most dads just don't have a clue what to
mm.
expect or even what their role should be or what they can
Yeah.
do. And that's actually kind of what led me the postpartum part is what really led me into the kind of the fatherhood research, like getting to know not just the history of, well, and more from the US, but kind of like the cultural aspects of what dads are expected to do or not to
Mm,
do. What dads, I had it just always comes to mind when I think about this, but I had a colleague who he had just had a baby and he came back to work. I think it was like 4 or 5 days after, and he had I think 5 weeks of leave that he could take. And I was like, "Are you?" I was like, "You're already back to work." I'm a bit surprised, and he's like, "Yeah, I mean, after 2 days, like I was oiling furniture in the backyard. Like, what else? I didn't have anything to do. Like, it's fine." And that was sort of by that point I'd like read a lot, and of course I'd had our first, but it's sort of a realization of what the like status quo is for
mm,
dads, and that's really low. I mean, the bar is super low, I would say.
yeah.
But in general, yeah, I think we were pretty well prepared for the birth. It's actually kind of a crazy story, crazy story itself. But yeah, after birth, no, for sure not.
I think that's the thing I definitely connect with as well is that it feels like there's a lot of material out there and courses and classes to prepare yourself up until the point of birth, especially considering the pregnancy and up to birth. It tends to be pretty much very similar things are happening. When the baby grows a
Yeah,
certain size, it's typically the certain things are always happening at the same point. But as soon as that baby's born, like so many decisions change, so many things change, and everyone's story is so much different that you can be thrown into a situation which is wildly different to your brother or your colleague or your friend or your sister, and you have
exactly.
no frame of reference, right? So exactly what sort of research would you do at that stage to kind of be the best dad you could be and the best husband you could be after the birth?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's some books that look at this. I think one that was really helpful. It's called like The Second Baby or something like this.
The second baby book, like a really straightforward title or
Yeah,
something.
something like this. And what I thought was interesting about this one is it talks about like how the role of the father changes because there's also a second child, and
Yeah.
then but that's a really interesting lens on postpartum. So that's one that was actually kind of interesting in that regard. Another one was the like partner birth book, I think it's called, and so that also just looks at as a dad, what you can you do in those first weeks, leading it has sections on pre-birth and post-birth. When I look at the courses and what's available generally, there's not much. There's very little. Usually in like a doula course or even a midwife session or a birth course, the last session is on postpartum.
Mm,
It's like the last lesson in the course. And for me, like I don't have a resource to point to because I think this is still an area that is being written about and like people are starting to like think about. I've worked a little bit with a doula in Amsterdam, and she's created a course focused for dads on
wow,
postpartum,
that's cool.
almost entirely on postpartum, and that was super cool. So I think it's an area that needs a lot more work and just a lot more people focusing on it.
Mm,
But for me, there's a lot of like key topics there, and I think one of them is equity in the home. So once the baby is born, everything is out the window. Like
Mm,
everything should be recalibrated, and that's fine.
mm,
That's normal. That should happen. If it doesn't
yeah.
happen, I think there are problems that get worse over time. Another one is like a dad's role in breastfeeding,
Mm,
and that feels like a little bit like, well, I don't know, but it's like we put so much onus on the mom to research everything, to troubleshoot
yeah.
everything, to like make sure she has the right caloric intake when that's rarely the case. So it's
Mm,
like ensuring she has a glass of water every time you bring her the baby. It's like really
mm,
simple, practical things, but actually make a big difference. Or
yeah.
preparing snacks that she can have throughout the day, because it's a higher caloric spend to nurse a baby than to grow a baby. And yet we
Yeah.
spend all this effort on like food for pregnant moms
Yeah.
and all these things. Of course, that's important. You're growing the baby, but you know, as soon as the baby's born, milk is the only thing that it's getting too. So that's also equally important in this way. And then, yeah, just the, like, encouraging, like, nursing can be super hard.
Mm,
It can be painful, it can go well, it can go bad, like, it's gonna be different for everyone, but just giving her that encouragement that she can do it, that, keep trying or troubleshoot this or get a
mm,
lactation consultant or help her kind of, like, be a participant in that.
yeah.
Um, and that's something I think a lot of dads miss.
What you're talking about is trying to encourage the husbands and the dads to bring something in from outside sources, and you can't always be asking them. Like I have heard a few dads kind of say, like, expectant dads say something on the lines of, "Oh, well, I ask her all the, like, I'm very happy to do whatever she tells me to do. I'm very happy to do what she wants," and that obviously comes from a good place, but you want to be taking things off the plate to just look
Yeah,
after them,
exactly.
right? And that shared research, I think, is very important. You seem very passionate about it, so it's awesome to hear you talk about it. Does this link into the starting of the dads group by any chance? Like this heart?
It does, like, it really does, because I think there was a moment. I wanna say my firstborn was probably 6 months old, maybe somewhere around this time, and there was kind of a moment for me where a lot of stuff just changed, and part of it was uh, I was working 5 days a week, in Utrecht, and we were living in The Hague, so it's not a huge commute, it's about an hour on the train, and so I was getting up at, 6:37. I was out the door before they woke up. Was at work all day, then I get home around 6, 6:30, sometimes later, just in time for dinner, either to cook it myself or to just, if my wife has had it ready, then great, but, play with my son for like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and then put him to bed.
Mm,
So during the week, that was like my role as a parent. And that like really wasn't what I wanted. And I mean, we had tried some things before that. Like from quite early on, because I was working, I think I had like 5 days of leave when my first son was born here. Like the paternity leave didn't really exist yet in
yeah.
the Netherlands. It was like, okay, I take nights. So, I mean, I really tried to do everything. So if he woke up and wanted to nurse, I got up and got him and brought him to my
Mm,
wife, and he nursed. And when he was done, I would bring him back. I was like a baby bike messenger, like kind of a baby transporter. And every diaper, like if I was in the house and there was a diaper, I did that. So
mm,
like I did what I could, or I felt I
yeah.
did what I could. And it just didn't feel like enough. Like I didn't have that, I don't know, ownership is not really the word, but like I wasn't stuck in. I don't know. I don't really know the right word in the way that I wanted to be.
You just wanted more.
Yeah, and like my dad is great. Like really, I have a good relationship with him, but I don't really know him, and I don't think he really knows me. And he was gone a lot when I was a little kid, and I had four other siblings that were taking up time, and I felt and my dad left 100% of everything in the house to my mom, and I
Mm,
did not have a good relationship with my mom until I went to university. And so I don't know, I felt like I missed something. I wanted to do something a bit different than my dad. And at the same time, like I had this realization that I actually could do everything for my son. Like I could parent my son without my wife. It's sort of a weird.
mm,
Once I knew it, it was like really obvious. But I think there was one moment. It's probably a little bit before this 6 months. But like I put him on. I put him in the baby carrier, which I hadn't used very much. I just went down, I took out the recycling, I threw that away, and I went down to the grocery store and I bought a couple of things and came back. And I had this realization like, oh, you know what? I can leave the house with my child who's quite young, and actually we're going to be fine. And
Mm.
maybe tomorrow we'll take the bus somewhere. And it just kind of like opened up a whole world of like I can sort of parent equally in a way. And
Mm.
I think there's a lot of friction against this because we put so much on the mom. We're like, oh, there's motherly intuition. And there's all these things that she just knows because she's a woman or because birth has happened or because whatever. And my wife and I talked about that a lot. And it's like, no, actually, it's Google. Like, she just did a lot of research.
Yeah.
Um, and, I could have done that too. I did. I did quite a bit, but it's like, half that stuff is, why won't the baby latch? Oh, Google it. Okay, here's some videos. Here's this. It's just knowledge. It's just
Mm.
engagement. It's just caring about the topic and troubleshooting and figuring it out together. And I think, as a parent of a young child, you can do that at a really early age, like by 3 months, even maybe even a little bit earlier. You know,
Mm.
you don't have like I would only leave the house with my wife. We kind of leave together as a unit, and we would go do stuff and come back.
Yeah.
And that sort of dawned on me a little bit later, that I actually could do that and I could parent in that way. And so that kind of
Mm.
changed some things for me. Like, actually looked for a different job and pretty quickly was able to get a job in The Hague. So then I was commuting 10 minutes by bike instead of, an hour plus on the train. And then on the weekend, I basically on the Saturday, I was like, okay, I'm going to take my son out. Like, I'm going to parent that day. I have that day where I can sort of do everything. And that's all kind of next to trying to like share the load in terms of not just the household work and food and all this other stuff, but like the mental load of parenting, which is a whole nother kind of aspect of this and kind of what I was talking about when I was talking recalibrating the whole relationship post birth. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not just, can I do this? Can I do that? What do you need next? Hey, my son's stuff, his clothes are getting small. It's like, no, okay, where do I go buy the clothes? Where do I like, what decisions can I make? Can I decide on the
Yeah.
next food that he's ready to eat? Or am I just asking her
Mm.
in a text message at the store, hey, what's he ready for? So
Mm.
it's like it's not just being engaged and being there and being helpful, but it's actually having an equal stake in their development or
Mm.
in their growth and knowing what the next milestone is and going out and buying stuff before they're too big, before they've grown out of the last
Mm.
size. And it's a huge challenge, I think. It's a huge journey because it's not what's expected of dads. I mean, no one is thinking that that's the standard, and we put a
Mm.
lot of that on moms. So this kind of all this stuff kind of like cooked together and kind of radicalized me a little bit at the same moment. And so I just set out to kind of connect with other dads. Um, and right at that time was when COVID hit. So I think my son was about 9 months when COVID hit. But what I was doing, I would take him to the park every Saturday morning, just as sort of a way to get out of the house, give my wife some space,
Mm.
and just spend some time with him because he was also waking up at like 6 or 7, so he needed to get out by that time.
Yep.
I met a friend of mine, a neighbor whose son was about like 3 weeks older at the park, and then we started just going every week. And after a few weeks, I collected like two or three more dads in the neighborhood, and we started a WhatsApp group. And I just committed, okay, I'm going to do this every Saturday for the foreseeable future, unless I'm not in the
Mm.
country or something. And I called it the Good Dad Club as kind of a backhanded, I don't know, joke sort of thing, where it's like
Mm.
really the only thing you have to do to be a good dad is take your kid to the park on Saturday. Like that's how low the bar is for
Yeah.
dads, right? And yeah, from there, it just kind of grew organically. And at the same time, I'm not active anymore on Instagram, but at the same time, I started an Instagram account, and I was kind of blogging a little bit. In short, just kind
Mm.
of what I was discovering when I was reading or like having interactions with my wife or with my son. And I use that as a way to educate myself a little bit. So by writing and doing a little bit on Instagram, I followed and consumed just tons of information, and just kind of tapped into new worlds. Discovered that way. I discovered like Montessori, which I didn't really know about before.
Mm.
Discovered baby-led weaning, like these things that ended up being kind of helpful tools and anchors in what ended up being our like philosophy as parents, as our
Yeah.
son got older. And that was it was really helpful. It just really gave me that grounding that I was looking for.
Mm.
And that became super important later. My wife, she ended up having surgery during the pregnancy of our second, and she was out for a long time. And
Oh.
I was fully like the caretaker of our 2-year-old at the time. And that bond has, grown until now. I mean, even if he cries, he gets hurt, he wants papa. And so I don't know, I feel like I'm in that position that I wanted to be. Like I'm
Mm.
closer to that now. Although there's still, of course, a ton of work to do, still a ton of learning,
Of
and
course. There always is.
you add another child, a second born who's totally different. Like you just
Yep.
I feel like early days, it's like every 3 weeks, whatever you're doing with the baby doesn't work anymore. It's like you're rocking
Oh
them to
yeah.
sleep this way or whatever, this way or that way, and after 3 weeks, it
Yeah.
doesn't work. So you change and you change and you
Yeah.
grow and you change, and you just grow with them. But yeah, it's been quite a journey, and I think the dad club has been kind of an anchor for me. It's been completely selfish in a way. Like I started it because like I want to build a network. I want to know some other parents. I want to like talk about some
Mm.
things. I want to have that pressure to just continue getting out there, going to the park, talking to dads, spending time with my sons. But the dad club's an interesting thing. I can talk for a long time about kind of where it is and how it's grown and changed
Mm.
and all this kind of stuff. But that's kind of everything that led to this like moment where I started the dad club just a few weeks probably after that.
That's really interesting that it was kind of fully organic because I wasn't sure if it was something that you would like. I want to make a club or make a group and like set out to do it. It was just a case of you bumped and you started talking to one person became two, three, four, and it just went from there. So
Yeah.
this the reason I ask is I read a book. It's called the Ultimate Stay at Home Dad Guide, where this guy basically goes in. He was a stay-at-home dad kind of like long before it was really very common at all, like 10, 15 years ago. And he really hammered home the importance of having like a small or large group of dads to share life with. Like that was as simple as that, and to lean on and to communicate with. And he went into detail like how to do it, how to set it up, how to find people,
Wow.
and he even like said advice like go to the library, you might find parents there. Go to this place, you might find he's like
Yeah.
make cards, do this, do that, like because he believed in it so much that he wanted the reader to really go out and do it. And so it's fascinating that yours it was organic and it just kind of grew and grew and grew. And I think from my perspective as someone that joined it, last year, I think everyone is super thrilled that it exists, and it's such an amazing thing that you kind of keep going to sow that time into that we all get to reap as dads, as parents that can grow together and just, make friends and our kids become friends. And it's
Yeah.
just such a wonderful thing that there isn't really like there's no downside to it. It's just all positive, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, that's super I don't know, it's super cool to hear, and it's always the dad club is funny for me too because it's something that of course, it takes some time, it takes a little bit of effort here and there, and, like, have to decide a few things,
Yeah.
but, like, it's really simple. Like, it's not like, I just go to the park on Saturday, and, sometimes I was the only person there, but that's great too, like, I was just with my son, right? That's
Mm.
what it was about. And the first couple years I would always ask the dads like, "Oh, well, like, but what do you guys wanna do? Like, do we wanna try to add some things, or do we you wanna choose the park, or do you wanna vote on this?" Or like, "No, no, 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 no. Just show up, do whatever you're doing, just, like, go to the park, post to the group, whatever you do, and we'll come." And I talked to a dad, a few months ago, and he said, "Yeah, I've never been to the meetup. I don't really contribute to the chat, but every Saturday, I feel like I have an option, and it just hasn't worked out with my kids, but
Mm.
I feel like there's a community there, there's support there. It just feels really calm to know that there are dads there if I need them. There are people I
Mm.
can talk to if I need them, and he hasn't needed them, which is totally fine. But it's been a blessing, and it's been just super cool to meet so many people. I mean, I've met, I think there are 300 guys in the group, and I've probably met 200 of them, maybe more, from all over the world, just different perspectives, different personalities, different experiences. But it's super nice to come together and just a way to just acknowledge, hey, yeah, we're kind of on this journey together, and you might get to talk to someone for
Mm.
2 minutes, but yeah, it's really validating, and I think it's just really healthy to just normalize fatherhood in this way, just like
Yeah.
being out with your kid. It shouldn't be special. I mean, it is, but it
Mm.
shouldn't be. And I think even in the last 5 years or so, it's really the culture here in the Netherlands has also changed a lot. Like you see dads out with kids. Like I remember when I was first with our first, like I did a lot of baby wearing once I hit that like 6 month kind of wake up.
Yeah.
And I never saw a guy baby wearing, like very rarely. And now you see it all the time. You see dads out with their
Yeah.
babies on a walk with a stroller. You see them just doing life as dads with their kids, and you know,
Mm.
it's not weird. It's not out of the norm. So I think it's tied into a little bit of a movement here, which I think is really healthy. Yeah, yeah, it started super organically, and I like early on I found this sort of trick. I don't know if it's a trick, but like I'd be at the park with the kids, and maybe a couple other dads are there, and eventually, you end up around them, or their kids are playing with your toys or whatever it is, and it's like, "Oh, are you here with the dad club?" And he's like, "What, a dad club? What is that?" I was like, "Oh, you don't know?
Wow.
There's like a WhatsApp group. We meet every week on the Saturday. You're welcome to join if you want." And that works pretty well.
That's a that's such a good trick. That's such a good little hack.
So now I have like an army of other dads who are doing this at the park.
I think that's a wonderful piece of advice for anyone that is looking to do something like that. Because I think everyone should be in a community like this. So there's your piece of advice, listeners. If you want to make a dad
It's that
group,
easy, right?
there you go.
Yeah, just go to the park, tell other people you're going, and then when you're there, just ask if they're also there for that reason, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, but it's been cool to see it grow because I mean, I think organically we grew to probably about 40, and then the moms discovered it in like a big way. So like
And start poking the husbands.
exactly. There are all
Yeah,
these mom groups on Facebook, WhatsApp, etc. From buying clothes to school advice. I mean, every topic you can imagine. There's like a mom WhatsApp group
yeah,
to discuss it. But they kind of figured out that, oh, if we get our husbands to join the dad club, then they'll take the kids out of the house once a week. So they
yeah.
shared the link to the WhatsApp group over dozen. I mean, it gets shared every other week or so across the different mom groups as
Mhm.
someone else discovers it or asks about it. So then it just started growing like crazy, which is super cool to see, and it's become a little bit more. I don't know if legit is the right word, but it's not just guys meeting up at the park. Like we now have sort of sponsorship from the Consultatiebureau. So that's the
Mm,
agency here in the Netherlands where all the kids get vaccinations. It's where parents go to get the baby weighed and checked in all these different milestones. It's the first place actually every parent brings their child after they're born, right? It's like for the hearing test,
yeah.
for all these things. One of the coordinators from the Consultatiebureau reached out to me and said, "Hey, we heard about the dad club. Like, we've been wanting something like this for a long time, like some kind of
Mm,
meetup group or some place for fathers to connect. And we'd love it if we can advertise your group a little bit at the different locations in the city, but don't change anything that you're doing. Don't like they had like sort of a format for the mom groups that they have. They have this like
mm,
one-on-one coaching aspect and these different play groups that meet during the week. Yeah, I said no, don't change anything. Like just join the fold a little bit. Like we'll sponsor you. Like if you need any funds for like events or for I don't know coffee or whatever, then we'll help you out. And otherwise, yeah, just reach as many dads as you can. So that's been cool. Hasn't changed a lot. I think it just helps it grow and just helps dads who are in this really crucial moment, like right like just their baby's like 3 weeks old or something, I think, when you
mm.
have a hearing test. So it's kind of a unique opportunity for them to like hear about the dad club and maybe start to think about, okay, hey, how can I get involved? Or maybe when my kid's a bit older, or I could maybe wear the baby to a park and meet some dads, have a cup of coffee, have a chat. So that's been cool. And otherwise now I feel like everywhere I go, I run into someone I know, or at least the kids of someone I know, which is
Yeah.
sometimes kind of funny because it's like I'm at the grocery store and there's like a 4-year-old with his grandma, and I'm like, "Hey, how's it going?" Um, but yeah, it's made made it feel a bit more like a village. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was after in a way. It's just a network, feeling of belonging, and just kind of that validation that, you're not going it alone as a dad.
Mm.
You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, everyone's going through the same stuff.
Yeah. No, I think it's such a cool thing. And I mean, it's partly kind of what inspired me to want to do this podcast thing, where just at those some of those Saturday meetups or other little play groups, you just talk to the parents and you're just hearing their stories. Like that parent's not telling you what to do with your child. You might be going through a problem, and but you can maybe say your problem to the other parent, and then I could say to you
Yeah.
that my child's struggling with blah blah blah, and you can say, "Oh, my child struggled with that, and this is what we did." You're not telling me what to do, but just hearing other people going through those problems or what they've tried, I think is such a empowering thing as a parent to have all these stories like in the back of our minds from other people about what they did, because
Yeah.
we don't need to be told what to do all the time. That's we want to do that from research, like with research backed evidence for certain things, which is great as well. But I think the anecdotal aspect of just trying different things is such a powerful thing. And you've been able to bring together so many dads. Like, I really think it's such an amazing thing.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And it's these topics like sleep, where there's like these cultural expectations, or like a child should be in their own room by X days old or X months
Mm,
old or whatever it is, or there are these certain milestones and expectations. And you get out there and you're like, one of the dads is looking a bit tired, and you ask a question, and then you hear like what's going on. And yeah, everyone has a totally different story on how they handle things and like what's a challenge. And you hear a few of those and you're like, oh yeah, what's normal is that it's different, and
mm,
there isn't one expectation that fits everyone. And you have to find what works for you. And
mhm,
some tricks and tips here are helpful because they kind of expand your horizons a little bit and give you some things to try. But yeah, no one has it figured out. And I don't know, any of these expectations around when babies should be doing this or that, it's like, take that stuff with a huge grain of salt, because
yeah.
it doesn't really apply to you in the same way.
Mm. If the doctor's not saying it, then it's maybe like not the most important thing. If the doctor is
Yeah,
saying
exactly.
it, then
In that case, yes, take the doctor's advice. That
yeah, that's
helps.
a pretty good way to go about things. Like that's always a good grounding as well. Just like, well, like what's the pediatrician or the nurses worried about? We can be worried about that, but this other stuff.
Exactly.
So I normally try and wrap up each things with just advice. I mean, we've spoken about your group. Would you have any other advice to people wanting to start something like a group like this?
Start with who you know, start with what you have. If you have guys or friends or family or whatever in a similar phase, then it helps a lot, right? I mean, it's like you're kind of in it together, and that brings people. That's sort of easier to bring people together. If you're looking at it from like really an organizer's point of view, I think there's a really unique moment to catch dads. And by catch, I mean like get them to question what fatherhood is, how they want to see that role for themselves. Maybe like inspire them to reach out or to partake in something that they might normally not partake in. I think that moment is during pregnancy
Mm,
for a lot of dads. It's like it's a whole new world. They know they don't know anything. They're also very likely to take a course because their wife is also taking a course. Like, they're
mm,
preparing, they're in this sort of thing, and there's so much like build up and pressure and all this stuff towards the birth. And I would say, yeah, I mean, that's when you can connect. I made some really good friends who are still friends, just in those parent birth courses. Like,
mm,
we took so many different things and tried, and like did a lot. Like, we actually made some really good friends along the way. And it helps to have those people who you could text at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, who are also awake with their 5-week-old baby, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that's a really powerful moment where you can connect with dads because they're open.
mm,
Um, Postpartum, I think that's when they need each other the most. That's when you have the most to offer if you want to help dads. But it's also the most busy, like overwhelming,
yeah.
no time to do anything kind of period of your life. So it's like, are you gonna go out and try new stuff? Are you gonna
Mm,
be open to community and all this stuff when you're like in the trenches? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes no. But I think if I were to yeah, I don't know, start a nonprofit or something. I would really focus on this, like getting them during pregnancy, and then
Yeah.
for the support during postpartum, and this
Mm.
like journey into new fatherhood. But I mean, even myself, I kind of woke up 6 months in. It's like, oh wait, this isn't
Yeah.
like it's going okay, but it's not where I want it to be.
Yeah.
And that's when I started reaching out and started learning and reading and like figuring things out. So of course, it's there's always an opportunity, but I
Mm.
think that's around that those moments is really key.
I hadn't even thought of that as being like the kind of prime opportunity, but no, I agree that I think because as a dad, you have the worries that you have this time ticking down almost. Obviously, give or take a few weeks, you're expecting this time to come, but you have lots of time to do
Yeah,
things and invest. So they are often investing, maybe in investing that time into books or courses like you did, or what have you. So I think that's actually a really good angle for finding these for dads that I hadn't even kind of considered myself. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us, Joe. Is there any other pearls of wisdom unrelated to the dad club you have for other dads out there? Or
I mean, there's so much you could talk for hours. No, I mean, I think just being flexible. Kids open up old wounds. They expose you to new things. They push you to grow. They test your patience. I think
Mm,
having a little bit of a view on them as a just even from day one, even though they can't even turn over or do anything, it's like seeing them as their own entity and then being flexible around that.
mm,
Like seeing them as their own personality, their own, treat them like an adult when they're 5 weeks old already in a way. I think it really helps, at least it helped me build a relationship in a way that was empowering,
mm,
if that makes sense. Because then, we could go do things. We could, I could figure out his personality a little bit. I
mm,
could, not just hear the screaming, but try to figure out what's wrong,
mm.
So it was less triggering, like kind of less overwhelming looking at it this way. But yeah, it's a journey, and I think being flexible for for whatever comes and knowing it's going to change the next day, that's super important.
There we have another Dad Dialogue conversation. A huge thank you goes out to Joe for coming onto the podcast and sharing his story with us. I think you'd agree with me that Joe clearly has a big heart for learning, developing, growing as a husband, developing as a dad, and trying to be the best he can be and be a positive impact to the people around him. I think we can all learn a thing or two from Joe's aspect towards parenting. And again, a huge thank you to him for sharing all of his wisdom with us today. If you are not part of a dad meetup group or a dad support group, try and find one. I think it's something that's really beneficial. You heard from Joe talk about one of the people that he's spoken to who's not even come to any of the meetups, but he just feels that support of just being in the group. So go out and find one. And if there's not one in your area, start one. You heard Joe, it was all organic. Just one person at the park got the number, made the group, and it just grew from there. So if it's something that you're looking for in your life, go out and try and find it, or go out and start it. Thank you so much for joining us today on Dad Dialogue Podcast. Go over to daddialogue.co.uk to sign up, come on the podcast yourself, and I hope you have an amazing day. Thanks so much for listening. Goodbye.